Tessa Mitchell had always been a practical person, someone who valued routine and stability. But nothing in her carefully planned life had prepared her for this. Caldora Station, a massive space outpost, was a melting pot of species from all corners of the galaxy. And Tessa, she was one of the few humans stationed here, assigned to help with engineering and system maintenance. She'd expected to be dealing with wires and tech, not aliens. Her roommate, Ryakven, was a Virathian, a towering reptilian warrior with thick green scales, sharp claws, and piercing yellow eyes. It wasn't the first time Tessa had encountered an alien. After all, Caldora Station was designed for interspecies cooperation, but living with one was a different matter entirely. And Ryak, he was no ordinary alien. He was a Virathian, a species known for their fierce pride and instincts that could put even the toughest of humans on edge. Ryak didn't speak much, and when he did, it was usually in a tone that made Tessa's skin crawl. Despite the awkwardness, they managed. Barely. Tessa kept to herself, working long hours in the station's control room, while Ryak spent his time meditating, working out, or practicing some sort of ancient martial arts. They had a sort of unspoken agreement. Tessa didn't bother him, and Ryak didn't make her life more difficult. Today, though, things were different. Tessa had barely settled into her usual spot in the control room when the station's emergency alarms went off. She jumped up, startled by the sudden noise, and quickly looked around. The dim lights of the station flickered before the AI's voice echoed through the corridors. "Attention all personnel. Caldora Station is under lockdown. All residents are to remain in their quarters until further notice." Tessa frowned, her mind racing. A lockdown. That was strange. Caldora Station wasn't exactly known for such drastic measures. Something had to be wrong. She turned to the console in front of her, trying to get more information, but the screen was blank, and the communication channels were dead. "Tessa, do not go near the door." Ryak's deep voice came from the doorway, making her jump. She hadn't heard him approach. His eyes were narrow, focused. "Something is wrong." Tessa looked at him, confused. "What's going on, Ryak? Why is the station locked down?" Ryak hesitated, then stepped into the room fully. "I don't know, but I know my people don't like being trapped. This could be dangerous." His words were blunt, but his expression was unreadable. Tessa took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She couldn't afford to panic, not now. "I need to figure out what's going on." The AI should have more information. Before she could move, Ryak's massive hand shot out to stop her. "No, stay here. We stay here." Tessa raised an eyebrow. "We're staying in here. What about the rest of the station? We can't just hide out and do nothing." Ryak's eyes narrowed again. "You don't understand. My species, during meeting season, we're unpredictable." He hesitated, then added in a softer voice, "I cannot guarantee what will happen if we are disturbed." "Meeting season," Tessa echoed, trying to process the information. She'd heard of it in passing. It was a time when Virathians became intensely territorial and their instincts took over, making them more aggressive. But Tessa had never thought she'd be stuck with a Virathian during such a season. Ryak, seeing her confusion, sighed. "I must meditate and focus. If I am interrupted, I could." He trailed off, not finishing the sentence, but Tessa understood enough. "Okay," she said, nodding slowly. "We'll stay put. But we still need to figure out why the station is on lockdown." Ryak gave a short grunt of agreement. He moved to the corner of the room, where he began his ritual of stillness. Tessa turned her attention back to the console, trying to fix the communication issue. Something wasn't right. It was unlike any malfunction she had ever seen. Minutes stretched into an uncomfortable silence. Every now and then, Tessa would glance at Ryak, who was now sitting cross-legged, his eyes closed, breathing slowly, his presence heavy in the room. She didn't dare disturb him. The last thing she wanted was to trigger whatever instinct had taken hold of him. She needed to focus, to stay calm. But as she worked, a low rumble shook the station. Tessa's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly grabbed her tools to check the station's power grid. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just a simple lockdown. It was something much more complex. A few minutes later, the alarms blared again, followed by the ice-cold voice. Warning. Energy anomalies detected in the lower sectors. All personnel are advised to remain in their quarters. Tessa froze. Something was happening beneath the station. She wasn't sure what it was, but one thing was clear. They weren't going to be safe just sitting here. She had to find out what was going on, even if that meant risking everything. Turning to Rack, she found him still deep in meditation, his expression serene despite the chaos unfolding around them. Rack, Tessa said softly, I think we need to go down there. We can't just wait for something bad to happen. Rack opened his eyes slowly, locking his gaze with hers. We will go. But we go together. Tessa nodded, ready to face whatever danger was lurking beneath the station. Neither of them had a choice. They were stuck with each other, and somehow, they'd have to make it through this. Tessa could feel her heart racing as she stood in front of the station's control panel, trying to access more information. The low hum of Caldora Station's systems seemed louder than usual, almost as if the station itself was holding its breath. She glanced at Ryak, who still sat motionless in the corner, his eyes closed, his body perfectly still, as though he was in a deep trance. The situation was growing more tense by the second, and Tessa had the feeling they weren't going to be able to stay in their quarters much longer. After what felt like an eternity of failed attempts to access the station's systems, Tessa finally managed to connect to a secondary terminal. Her fingers moved quickly across the controls, her mind focused entirely on figuring out what was going wrong. Come on, she muttered under her breath, frustration mounting. Suddenly, the screen flickered, and an encrypted message appeared. It was brief, but the words were clear. Artifact discovered in lower sectors. Energy levels rising. All personnel remain in quarters. Tessa's eyes widened. The message didn't make sense. An artifact. What artifact? She hadn't heard anything about this before. The only artifacts on the station were relics collected for study, but they were usually stored safely in a secure lab. She had to know more. Rayak, she called, turning toward the Virathian. There's something going on. An artifact was discovered in the lower sectors. And, before she could finish, Rayak opened his eyes. His golden gaze seemed to pierce through her, and for a moment, she felt like he could read her every thought. An artifact. Rayak said, his voice steady but full of unspoken weight. Is it Virathian? Tessa was taken aback. She hadn't considered the possibility. Rayak was Virathian, and the mention of an artifact had clearly struck a nerve. He stood up slowly, his massive form towering over her, and she felt a rush of unease. I need to go down there, Rayak said firmly, his voice low and filled with determination. Tessa felt a mix of hesitation and urgency. What if the artifact is dangerous? What if it's causing these problems? I know my people, Rayak replied, his tone growing more intense. If it's Virathian, it calls to me. We must go. Tessa's thoughts were racing. Rak's connection to his species' history and artifacts was undeniable, and it was clear that whatever was happening had to do with Virathian relics. She had no idea what kind of power such an artifact could hold, but she knew that finding it was their only option. If they could learn more about it, maybe they could stop whatever was triggering the station's strange behavior. All right, she said, swallowing her nervousness. Let's go. Together, they headed toward the lower sectors, moving cautiously through the dimly lit corridors of Caldora Station. The once bustling hallways were eerily quiet now, with only the occasional hum of machinery to break the silence. It didn't feel like a place that was supposed to be under lockdown. It felt abandoned. As they descended through the station's levels, Tessa noticed how Rayak seemed more alert, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. His posture was tense, his every step measured. He wasn't just walking, he was hunting. The deeper they went, the colder it became. The temperature dropped by several degrees, and a sense of unease settled in Tessa's stomach. Something was off. She could feel it. It was as though the very air was charged with energy, something unnatural. They reached a large, sealed door at the very bottom of the station, the last barrier between them and the unknown. Ryak moved forward, and without a word, placed his hand on the control panel next to the door. A soft beep echoed through the corridor, and the door slid open with a mechanical hiss. Tessa's breath caught in her throat. Before them stood a massive chamber, its walls lined with strange symbols that pulsed with light. In the center of the room, on a pedestal, was the artifact. It was unlike anything Tessa had ever seen. It was a smooth, oval-shaped object, shimmering with an iridescent glow. The artifact seemed to hum with a deep energy, and as Tessa took a step closer, she felt a tingling sensation in the air. Ryak stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the artifact. He was drawn to it, as though something was pulling him toward it. His body was rigid, and Tessa could see that his fists were clenched, his claws digging into his palms. It was as if the artifact was calling to him, urging him to claim it. "What is it?" Tessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryak didn't answer immediately. He reached out with one hand, his fingers hovering just above the artifact, as though afraid to touch it. For a long moment, he seemed lost in thought, his eyes distant. "I've seen this before," Ryak murmured, his voice tight with emotion. "This is a Virathian relic, one of the lost relics." Tessa frowned. "Lost relics? You mean it's ancient?" Ryak nodded slowly, his face hardening. "Yes, and it holds great power. It could change everything for my people." Tessa's heart raced. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. If this artifact was truly as powerful as Ryak believed, it could have far-reaching consequences, not just for the Virathians, but for the entire station. They needed to be careful. Before Tessa could say anything else, a loud crash echoed from the far side of the chamber. The door they had entered through slammed shut, trapping them inside. Tessa's breath caught in her throat. The situation had just taken a dangerous turn. Tessa's heart raced as the door slammed shut, echoing through the chamber. She spun around, eyes wide, expecting to see the source of the noise, someone or something that might have locked them in. But the room was empty, and the air felt colder than before. The door was sealed tight, and there was no sign of anyone nearby. Ryak, on the other hand, didn't seem surprised at all. He was standing still, his attention focused entirely on the artifact. His eyes were no longer the steady yellow they had been moments before. Now, they glowed with an almost unnatural intensity, a reflection of the artifact's pulsing light. He wasn't just looking at the relic, he was feeling it, connecting with it. "Ryak." Tessa's voice broke through the silence, her tone filled with uncertainty. "What's going on? Why did the door close?" Ryak didn't answer at first. He took a slow step forward, his eyes narrowing. "This artifact." His voice was almost reverent, and his hands hovered just above it, as if afraid to touch it directly. "It's more than just a relic. It's a key to something hidden deep in my people's past." Tessa's curiosity was piqued, but her nerves were still on edge. "A key to what?" He glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "To a power we lost long ago. A power that could change everything for my people." His voice dropped lower. "And for you too." Tessa frowned, not fully understanding. "For me? What do you mean?" Before Ryak could answer, a low rumble shook the chamber, followed by a sudden burst of energy from the artifact. Tessa staggered back, her heart pounding in her chest. The artifact's light grew brighter, almost blinding, and the air hummed with an electrical charge. She could feel the energy around her, thick and alive, like static before a storm. Ryak stepped closer to the pedestal, his hand now hovering just above the artifact. "It's awakening," he murmured. "We need to be careful." Tessa took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had always relied on logic and technology, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this kind of power. "What happens if we touch it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "We don't know," Ryak replied, his voice tight with tension. "But it's calling to me. I can feel it. It's part of my people's lost legacy. We're meant to unlock it." Tessa hesitated. She knew this was dangerous, more dangerous than anything she had faced before. But Ryak was different now. His instincts were guiding him, and something deep inside Tessa told her that they couldn't walk away from this. If this artifact was as powerful as Ryak said, they had to understand it, to control it before it controlled them. "I'll help you," Tessa said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling in her mind. She took a step forward, glancing at Ryak. "We'll figure it out together." For the first time since the lockdown began, Ryak seemed to relax just a little. His shoulders, which had been tense, lowered slightly. He nodded in agreement, a quiet sign of trust. But before they could make any further move, the room shook again, this time more violently. The walls around them groaned as if the station itself was under pressure. Tessa stumbled, grabbing onto a nearby railing to steady herself. Ryak's gaze snapped to the side, his eyes wide with something like recognition. "It's happening," he whispered. "The station is reacting to the artifact. It's connected to Caldora Station in ways we don't fully understand." The humming from the artifact intensified, now vibrating through the floor beneath them. Tessa's mind raced. If the station was reacting to the relic's energy, it could mean a lot of things. But none of them sounded good. Whatever was happening, it was beyond her ability to control. "I think we need to move it," Tessa said, her voice urgent. "If the artifact is causing all of this, maybe we can stop it by taking it somewhere safer." Ryak shook his head, his expression dark. "We can't move it. The relic chooses when it's moved. It has a mind of its own." Tessa swallowed, trying to make sense of it all. This wasn't just an ordinary artifact. This was something alive, something that responded to its environment, to its keepers. And now it had found a new connection, one with Ryak, and possibly with her. "Then we need to contain it," Tessa said, feeling a plan take shape in her mind. "We need to figure out how to control it." Ryak's eyes flickered with a mix of doubt and acceptance. "It may be beyond control, but I'm willing to try, with you." The energy in the room continued to grow, filling the air with an almost unbearable pressure. The walls were buckling slightly, and the low hum of the station was now accompanied by a strange otherworldly sound. It was like the entire station was singing in harmony with the artifact, each note more urgent than the last. "We can't wait much longer," Tessa said, her voice rising with the urgency of the situation. She turned to Ryak, her heart pounding. "We need to figure out how to stop this before it destroys everything." Ryak's expression was unreadable, but he stepped forward, closer to the artifact. He held his hand out, hovering just above it. The light seemed to pulse with his every movement, as if the relic was aware of his presence. "We're in this together," Ryak said quietly, more to himself than to her, "and we'll face whatever comes next. Together." Tessa took a deep breath and stepped forward to stand beside him. This was no longer just a mission. It was a journey into the unknown, one that would challenge everything they knew about the universe and about themselves. But they had no choice. The fate of the station, and perhaps more, rested on their shoulders. The air in the chamber was thick with tension. Tessa and Ryak stood side by side, their eyes locked on the artifact, its glow pulsating with an energy that seemed to reverberate through the walls of Caldora Station. The humming sound was louder now, vibrating beneath their feet. The longer they stayed, the more oppressive it became, like the whole station was alive, responding to the presence of the relic. "We need to figure out what it wants," Tessa said, her voice barely audible over the growing noise. "Why is it doing this?" Ryak didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the artifact, his expression intense. It was as though he was listening to something only he could hear, something beyond the hum and the vibrations. For a moment, Tessa wondered if Ryak was even fully aware of his surroundings. His focus had shifted entirely to the relic, and the longer they stood there, the more she felt a strange, almost magnetic pull toward it. "I feel it," Ryak muttered, his voice low. "The artifact is awake. It's calling to me." Tessa glanced at him, uneasy. "What do you mean, calling to you?" Ryak turned his head slightly, his golden eyes reflecting the strange glow of the artifact. "The Virethian people have legends about this relic. It's said to hold the key to an ancient power, one that was lost long before my people ever reached the stars. But it was hidden away, sealed, to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands." Tessa's heart skipped a beat. "So you're saying this thing could give you, us, a power that dangerous?" Ryak's gaze hardened. "Not just any power. It's the power to control the very fabric of energy itself. My people believed it was too dangerous to use, so they sealed it away. But now, it's been disturbed, and it's drawing us in." Tessa's mind raced. The idea of controlling energy on such a scale was terrifying. If the artifact was truly capable of such power, it could alter everything. Life, the station, even the balance of the entire galaxy. It was far too dangerous to ignore. "We need to stop it," Tessa said firmly. "If it's calling to you, Ryak, we might be able to use that to control it. But we have to act fast." Ryak slowly nodded, his hand still hovering above the artifact. "I don't know if we can control it. It's been waiting for centuries. But we have to try." Just as he reached out, the artifact pulsed brighter than before, sending a shockwave of energy through the room. Tessa stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat as the force knocked her off balance. She landed hard on the ground, her hands pressing against the cool floor to steady herself. The energy in the room was overwhelming. And it was clear now, this was no ordinary relic. "Ryak," she shouted, fear rising in her chest. "What's happening?" Ryak didn't respond immediately. His body was stiff, as though he was being pulled toward the artifact by some invisible force. His hands clenched at his sides, and Tessa could see the strain on his face as he fought against it. The artifact's energy seemed to be feeding on his presence, drawing out something deep within him. "I can feel it," Ryak finally said, his voice strained. "It's awakening something inside me." Tessa's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. The artifact wasn't just calling to Ryak. It was bonding with him, drawing out the power that had been sealed away. It was changing him. But how far would it go? And could they stop it? "Ryak, you have to fight it," Tessa cried, her voice full of desperation. She scrambled to her feet and rushed toward him, but the room seemed to pull her back, the energy pushing against her like a wall. Ryak started, but his words were cut off by a sudden explosion of light. The artifact flared brightly, its energy surging outward in every direction. For a brief moment, everything went white. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the light faded. Tessa blinked, trying to clear her vision. When she could finally see again, her eyes widened in shock. Ryak was no longer standing in front of the artifact. Instead, he was kneeling on the floor, his body glowing with an intense energy. His once green scales were now shimmering with golden light, and his eyes were completely white, filled with a power that seemed to come from another world. Tessa gasped. "Ryak, what happened to you?" Ryak lifted his head, his gaze meeting hers. His voice was different now, calm yet filled with an unsettling authority. I have become the relic's vessel. It has chosen me." Tessa took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Ryak had always been powerful, but this was something else entirely. It was like he was no longer the same person. She stopped herself, unable to find the right words. "The artifact has given me its power," Ryak said, his voice almost serene. "And now I can feel everything. The energy flows through me. I am connected to the station, to the relic, to everything. Tessa's mind was reeling. She had known Ryak was important to the artifact. But this was something she hadn't even considered. The artifact hadn't just bonded with him. It had transformed him, unlocking abilities that were beyond comprehension. Ryak, we need to figure out how to reverse this, Tessa said, her voice trembling. This isn't you. This is too much power. But Ryak didn't respond. Instead, he stood up slowly, his movements fluid and controlled. The energy around him pulsed like a living thing, responding to his every movement. We cannot reverse it, Ryak said quietly, his voice no longer the same. This power is mine now, and it will not be contained. Tessa's stomach twisted with fear. She had no idea how to stop this. The power had already consumed Ryak, and now it seemed like it was too late to turn back. Tessa couldn't move. She stood frozen in place, her heart racing as she watched Ryak, now transformed by the power of the artifact. His golden scales shimmered like the sun, and his eyes, once full of familiar warmth, were now pure white, empty, yet filled with an unsettling intensity. Ryak, Tessa whispered, her voice shaking. What happened to you? This isn't you anymore. Ryak didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his hand, palm open, and the energy surrounding him flared in response. The air in the chamber crackled with raw power, and Tessa felt the pressure of it push against her chest. It was as though the very room was bending to his will. It is still me, Tessa, Ryak said slowly, his voice calm, almost otherworldly. But I have been changed. The relic has unlocked a part of me I never knew existed. I can feel everything now, the energy of the station, the life force of every living thing aboard. I am more than what I was before. Tessa swallowed, her mind struggling to keep up with the overwhelming shift in Ryak's behavior. She had never seen him like this. So distant, so powerful. This wasn't just a physical transformation. This was something deeper, something that had completely altered his connection to the world around him. What does this mean? Tessa asked, her voice barely a whisper. What are you going to do with all that power? Ryak turned to face her, and for a moment, it almost seemed like he was seeing her for the first time. His expression softened, but there was a flicker of something else, something cold. I don't know yet, Ryak replied, his gaze distant. But I know that I can't go back. The artifact chose me, and now I must fulfill its purpose. Tessa's stomach twisted with fear. What purpose? What had the artifact awakened inside him? She had no answers, only a growing sense of dread. Ryak, this isn't safe, she said urgently. You have to fight it. You're still you. You can still control this. For a moment, Ryak's eyes flickered, and Tessa thought she saw a trace of the old Ryak, the one she knew. But then the moment passed, and his expression returned to its calm, almost detached state. I cannot fight it, he said, his voice quiet, almost regretful. The relic has bound me to its will. I am a part of it now, and its purpose is to awaken, to rise. Tessa felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what he meant. The artifact wasn't just a relic. It was a key to something greater, something that had been dormant for centuries. And now it was awakening, and Ryak, in his new form, was tied to it. Suddenly, the room shook again, and a loud rumbling noise filled the chamber. Tessa staggered, trying to keep her balance as the energy in the room surged. The walls seemed to vibrate with the same power that now flowed through Ryak. What's happening? Tessa asked, her voice tight with fear. The station is reacting, Ryak said. The relic's power is beginning to spread. It's connecting with the station itself. It is awakening everything, every system, every part of Caldora Station. Tessa's mind raced. If the artifact was linking to the entire station, the consequences could be catastrophic. The station's systems could go haywire. And if the energy in the artifact was unstable, it could tear the entire place apart. We need to stop it, Tessa said urgently, taking a step forward. You need to control it, Ryak. We can still figure this out. But Ryak only shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. There is no stopping it now, Tessa. The relic's power is too great. It cannot be contained. Tessa's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just about Ryak anymore. The station itself was in danger. The artifact had the power to change everything, and if it continued to grow, there might be no way to reverse it. We have to warn the others, Tessa said, her mind racing with possibilities. The crew, the station's leadership, they need to know what's happening. Ryak looked at her, his expression unreadable. There is no time for warnings. The station is already changing. And I must understand it. Before Tessa could respond, Ryak lifted his hand again, and the energy in the room surged, crackling with intensity. The ground beneath them trembled, and the very air seemed to warp as the power of the relic surged forward. Tessa stumbled back, her heart pounding as the force of the energy grew stronger. In the distance, alarms began to blare, and the station's lights flickered wildly. The hum of machinery sounded like it was on the verge of breaking apart, and the walls shook more violently. The entire station was reacting to the artifact's energy, just as Ryak had predicted. Tessa turned to Ryak, her face pale with fear. What are you going to do with all this power? Ryak's gaze softened for a moment. I don't know yet, but I am the relic's vessel now. Its power is mine to wield, and I must see what it will bring. Tessa's mind was racing. She had no idea what to do. Ryak was no longer the ally she had trusted. The power of the artifact had changed him. She didn't know if she could trust him anymore. But one thing was clear. If they didn't find a way to stop this, the entire station might be lost. With every passing second, the energy around them grew stronger, the artifact's power spreading like wildfire. Tessa had no choice but to act. Tessa's heart raced as the rumbling in the station grew louder. The walls trembled, and the entire Caldora station seemed to be vibrating with the intense energy flowing from the artifact. It was as if the station itself was alive, responding to the relic's power. And Ryak, the one now bound to it, was the key to everything. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She couldn't just stand there. The station was in chaos, alarms blaring and lights flickering erratically. The crew needed to know what was happening. The artifact was no longer just a relic. It was a force, an unstoppable power that could tear the station apart if it continued to grow unchecked. Ryak. Tessa called out, stepping toward him. We need to stop this. The station's systems are failing. The crew, people will get hurt. Ryak didn't respond. He stood motionless, his eyes glowing with that eerie white light, his hands raised as if he were conducting some unseen orchestra of energy. The power was flowing through him in waves, and Tessa could see it in his posture. He was no longer the same person. The power was controlling him now, not the other way around. Ryak. Tessa's voice broke through the chaos, desperation creeping into her words. You have to listen to me. We have to find a way to stop this before it's too late. Ryak's head turned slowly toward her, and for a brief moment, she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. But it was quickly gone, replaced by the calm, detached look that had taken over since the artifact's power consumed him. There is no stopping it, Tessa, Ryak said in a voice that was both calm and unsettling. The relic's purpose is clear. It must awaken, and I must fulfill its will. It is my destiny. Tessa's stomach twisted. He wasn't the Ryak she had known. This wasn't the same person. The power had taken over, and now it was controlling everything. But Ryak, you are the station's systems, Tessa argued, her voice pleading. The relic is causing everything to malfunction. It's destabilizing everything. You're tied to the station. You can stop it. Ryak blinked slowly, as though considering her words, but instead of answering, he raised his hand again, and the energy in the room flared to life. Tessa was thrown back by the force of it, her body slamming into the wall. She gasped for breath, feeling the electric charge in the air, making her skin tingle. The power was growing. Too fast. If they didn't act soon, there might be no way to stop it. Tessa pushed herself up from the floor, her mind spinning. The whole station was beginning to shake, the very structure of the Caldora station buckling under the strain. The lights flickered more violently now, casting long shadows across the walls. The station was in danger of falling apart. The energy was overwhelming, and if Ryak didn't regain control soon, everything would be lost. Ryak! Tessa shouted once more. She had to make him see reason. She couldn't let him fall further into this power. You have to fight it. You don't know what the relic will do once it's fully awakened. It won't stop. It can't be controlled. Ryak's eyes softened slightly, but his expression remained distant. I do not wish to hurt anyone, Tessa. But I cannot stop this now. The relic is connected to me. It has chosen me. Tessa's chest tightened. She knew Ryak didn't want this, but the power of the relic had changed him. It had taken control of him, and it was too strong for him to fight alone. You're not alone, Tessa said, her voice steady. We can still do this together. Please, Ryak, let me help you. For the first time since the artifact had awoken, Ryak looked at her fully. There was a flicker of the old Ryak, his friend, the person who had fought beside her through so many challenges. But it was only for a moment. I cannot deny the power, Tessa, Ryak whispered. It has consumed me, but I still feel your presence, your friendship. Tessa's heart skipped a beat. She had known Ryak long enough to know that he was still in there somewhere, that the essence of the person he had been was still buried beneath the power of the relic. She wasn't giving up on him. You can fight it, Ryak, she said firmly. We'll find a way to shut it down. Together. Ryak's expression grew distant again, and his body began to glow brighter. The energy in the room intensified, making Tessa's body feel as if it were being pulled in different directions. The station was groaning, its systems breaking down as the artifact's energy continued to spread. I don't know if I can hold on much longer, Ryak said, his voice strained, as though the energy inside him was too much to bear. The relic's power is too strong. It is too much. Tessa's mind raced. She had to do something. There had to be a way to sever the connection between Ryak and the artifact. If she could only find a way to shut it down, if they could break the link, she might be able to stop this before the entire station was consumed. Ryak, she said urgently, taking a step forward despite the overwhelming pressure in the room. Listen to me. We need to find the artifact's control mechanism. If we can sever the link between you and it, we can stop this. Ryak's eyes flickered for a brief moment, as though he was considering her words. The glow around him pulsed, flickering with uncertainty. You may be right, Ryak said slowly, his voice full of internal conflict. But how? How can we stop something that is a part of me now? Tessa's breath caught in her throat. She had no clear answers, but one thing was certain. If they didn't act soon, the station and everyone aboard would be lost. Tessa's mind was racing. She had spent so much time trying to help Ryak, to reach the person he once was. But with the artifact's power coursing through him, it felt like he was slipping away from her with every passing second. If they didn't act soon, there might be no way to save him, and no way to stop the destruction that was spreading through Caldora Station. The energy in the room surged again, louder now, almost deafening. The walls trembled as if they were on the verge of collapsing. Tessa could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest, the force of it making it hard to breathe. The relic's power had taken hold of Ryak completely, but there was still a part of him, a tiny part, that hadn't been consumed by it. Ryak, she said again, her voice filled with determination. Please, fight this. We can do this together. You're not alone. For a moment, there was silence. The air hummed with the residual energy, and Tessa waited, heart in her throat. Then, Ryak's head turned toward her, his glowing white eyes meeting hers. She could see the conflict within him, The battle between the power of the relic and the person he used to be. I don't know if I can, Ryak said softly, his voice laced with both fear and sadness. The artifact is a part of me now. I can feel it. Its will, its purpose. It wants to rise, to awaken, to control everything. Tessa stepped closer, her hands shaking, as she reached out toward him. But you control your destiny, Ryak. The relic may have chosen you, but that doesn't mean you have to follow its every command. You are more than this power. You are still you. Ryak's expression faltered for a moment, his glowing eyes flickering with something like doubt. Tessa could see the internal struggle in his face, as if he was trying to break free from the power that had overtaken him. But it was clear that the more he resisted, the more the energy inside him surged. The station continued to shake, and the lights flickered as the artifact's energy connected with every system aboard Caldora. The once functional station was beginning to break down. If they didn't act fast, the damage would be irreversible. Tessa took a deep breath, looking around desperately for anything that could help. Her eyes locked onto the control panel near the back of the chamber, the one place where the station's central systems were linked, the only chance to disconnect Ryak from the artifact's power. But the control panel was far, too far to reach in time. We need to get to the control room, Tessa shouted, her voice urgent. It's our only chance to stop the artifact before it destroys everything. Ryak didn't move, his body glowing brighter with every passing moment. But Tessa could see that he was listening. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. I'll help you, Ryak said finally, his voice strained. But you have to promise me that you will leave the station if we fail. This power, it's beyond anything I've ever felt before. Tessa nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to leave him. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. Together, they made their way toward the control panel. The room shook again as the energy surged. But this time, Tessa could feel the power beginning to shift. It wasn't just the station reacting to the artifact. It was Ryak, too. He was finally fighting back. Stay close to me, Ryak said, his voice low but steady. We need to deactivate the central systems to sever the link between me and the relic. If we can do that, we can stop the power from spreading. Tessa's heart raced as they approached the control panel. She could see the complex set of controls, the holographic interface blinking erratically as the energy from the artifact surged through the station. She had no idea how to deactivate it, but she was determined to try. Ryak, Tessa said urgently. Tell me what to do. How do we stop it? Ryak stepped forward, his hand outstretched toward the panel. As his fingers made contact, the screen flickered to life. The interface was alive with energy, its pulsing light matching the rhythm of the artifact's power. We need to isolate the artifact's energy source, Ryak explained quickly. I'll have to connect to the station's core and force it to shut down. It's going to be risky. Tessa looked at him, eyes wide. Are you sure you can do this? Ryak smiled faintly, a glimpse of the old him shining through. I don't have much choice. With a deep breath, Ryak began to work his way through the system. The holographic interface twirled and shifted, responding to his every movement as if it recognized him. Tessa watched in awe as he manipulated the controls with ease, his fingers moving quickly and decisively. The station trembled again, the hum of the energy growing louder. But this time, there was something different about it. A change in the rhythm, a slowing down of the pulsing energy. It's working, Ryak said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. We're cutting off the connection. Tessa could see it too. The energy that had once been so overwhelming was now beginning to dissipate, the power slowly fading away as the link between Ryak and the artifact weakened. The station's systems began to stabilize, the alarms fading into silence. And then, as the last of the energy was drawn from Ryak, the glow in his eyes faded. He slumped, his body collapsing from the strain, but Tessa was there to catch him. We did it, Tessa whispered, relief flooding through her. Ryak smiled weakly, his once glowing scales returning to their natural color. I couldn't have done it without you. Tessa helped him stand, feeling the weight of everything they had just survived. The station was still intact, and they had saved everyone aboard. Ryak was back to himself, no longer bound by the artifact's power. It had been a close call, but they had made it through, together. And though the future was uncertain, Tessa knew one thing for sure: they would face whatever came next side by side.